Welcome to chapter 30 of the book of Numbers, Ordinances regarding vows. We went through vows quite a bit in detail in Leviticus chapter 27. I believe it's the last chapter of Leviticus, and rather than repeating all of that, if you wanted to find out more history on vows in the Bible, usages, and so forth, I would highly recommend going to chapter 27 of the book of Deuteronomy, Leviticus. Vows, it says here, and Moses spoke to the rulers of the tribes of the sons of Israel, saying, this is the saying which the Lord ordered, Kyrios ordered this, saying, Anthropos, anthropos, a man, whoever should vow, in 2172, should is in the subjunctive, and it's a verb at 2172. Whoever should vow, evkin, a vow, 2171 is the noun, to Kyrio, or should swear by an orchon, an oath, or should confirm a set of limits upon his life, he shall not profane his word. That is, he has to do what he says. The word for evki, vow, 2171, and 2172, evkeo, to vow, are generally found in the Old Testament, maybe 100 places, where only 10 places in the New Testament. Most of them were Jesus either mentions them vowing, the Jews vowing, or he mentions, Paul mentions his vowing. I would vow that I would give my life up for the Jews if it was possible that they would believe, something like that. The only place that I found that was really separate from that with concerns of vow is in James 5:15 and 16, where it says, and the vow of belief will deliver the weary one, and the Lord will raise him. And if he should be committing sins, it shall be forgiven him. Acknowledge to one another the transgressions, and make a vow for one another, so that you should be healed. Much prevails by the supplication being energized by a just one. Prayer is prosevki. It has the evki, and it has the preposition pros in front of it, is to pray. They're very closely tied together when it comes to the spiritual part of it. It's basically to the Lord. I don't know if they vowed to one another. I suppose they could make a vow or an oath that I'll give you, if you do this for me, then I'll do this for you, and so forth. New Testament, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so there's no place in the New Testament where it talks about Christians having to vow except for this place, interesting place in James. But even there, if you look at it, the vow of belief, it's a belief. Will deliver the weary one, and the Lord will raise him. And if he should be committing sins, it shall be forgiven him. Acknowledge to one another the transgressions, and make a vow for one another. So there it is to another person, but yet the Lord is in the midst of that vow. I have a good friend, a neighbor who I've mentioned before, but his thinking of that he was doing good in life, and so therefore this is what counts to God, where I told him it doesn't really, it doesn't count that much when you're in front of a judge. If you had a traffic ticket going through a red light and you went to the judge and you tried to tell him you lived a good life, you treat your wife nicely and your kids and work every day and so forth, he's going to go guilty. You ran through the red light. Same thing with this being good. We stand in front of God. We're going to be naked. All the things that we've done, all of our sins are going to be seen by him. And so I ended up having the chance to tell him that. The Lord gave me the chance to tell him that. and he's about 8 or 9 years younger than me, and I'm almost in my 80s. And so, well, he accepted the Lord. He said that made all kinds of sense to me. And so he gave his life to the Lord, and he came over and looking for, should asking me if it's necessary for him to be baptized, as he was baptized when he was a child in the Catholic Church. And I told him, well, it's immerse, and being immersed, I'm not going to sit there and be dogmatic whether you should or you shouldn't, but to me, my immersion was with thousands of people in a mega church in Southern California in the ocean, and it meant everything to me. I felt so clean when I came out. I'm like a new person, and like, why wouldn't I want to do this? And then I read him the story about the Ethiopian eunuch who Philip was talking to, and he ended up being the first Gentile or person of the nations that was baptized. And then we started talking about sin, and without getting into the details, finally I led to me to say, well, one of the prerequisites of being delivered by Jesus Christ is to be a sinner. This is what he came for, and he's delivering sinners. So if you are a sinner, then you follow that prerequisite. Not that you should become a sinner so that you should be delivered by Jesus, as I think the complaint to Paul is that that's what he was teaching. But Jesus came for sinners to deliver them. And we're going to be sinners until we cross over from death into life with Jesus Christ. So I mentioned that to him. And now I saw this here, and we acknowledge one another the problems we have in this world and sins of the flesh and so forth. And so I didn't remember this part here, but I mean, in a way, we haven't made a vow for one another. But next time I see him, I'm going to read this to him. In that it's a great verse in the Bible of vowing and to God to, we each want to clean up our act, be better people. Not that this is going to keep us from sinning. We still will be sinners, but we hopefully won't will become more Christ-like, which is the ideal. And so this whole thing in the vowing now, it comes back down into these people. They actually made vows to God for different things or to other people. And it says, all as many things as it should come forth from out of his mouth, he shall do. So it's best in the New Testament, you let your yes be yes and your no be no, rather than making a vow, like a hasty vow like Jephthah, who put his daughter in a state of being a virgin until her death because of his vow. You can read about that in the book of Judges. And it continues, and if a woman should vow a vow to the Lord, or confirm a set of limits in the house of her father in her youth, and her father, the patros, paternal, should hear akusi, her vows, and her sets of limits, which she confirmed on her life. I'm not going to do this if this happens and so forth. I won't go here, I won't do this. And her father should remain silent. Then all the matters of her vows shall stand, and all the sets of limits which she confirmed on her life she shall abide by. But if, in shaking his head in dissent, her father should dissent, in whichever day he should hear her vows, the daughter, while he's living with her, and her sets of limits which she confirmed on her life, shall not stand, and the Lord shall clear her. So the father basically, her father shook his head in dissent. She may have said something, well, I'm not going to get married because of this or this, and that's my vow. And the father knows that she should probably be married. It'd be the best thing for her. So he shakes his head in dissent. so her vow doesn't stand. But if in coming to pass she should be to a man, I changed that, a man's wife, she should be to a man, and her vows be upon her, according to the distinction from her lips, as many things as she confirmed on her life, and her husband should hear, and should remain silent concerning her in whichever day he should hear, then thus shall stand all her vow. So the vows and her sets of limits which she confirmed on her life, they shall stand. So the husband, as the father, can nullify the vows of the young daughter living with them, so a husband can do the same with the wife. Now, wife with the husband, no, doesn't say that. But if in shaking his head in dissent, her husband should dissent in whichever day he should hear all her vows and her sets of limits which she confirmed on her life, they shall not abide, for her husband shook his head in dissent concerning her, and the Lord shall clear her. And a vow of a widow, and a woman being cast out, a divorcee, as many things as she should make a vow on her life, shall abide to her. And she doesn't have a husband or anybody, a widow or a divorced person. But if in the house of her husband her vow be, or the set of limits on her life with an oath, and her husband should hear and should remain silent concerning her, and should not shake his head in dissent concerning her, then all her vows shall stand, and all her sets of limits which she confirmed on her life shall stand concerning her. But if in removing her husband should remove them, in whichever day he should hear all as many things as should come forth from out of her lips concerning her vows, and concerning the sets of limits on her life, it shall not remain to her. Her husband removed them, and the Lord cleared her. So the husband has the right over the wife. Every vow and every binding oath, and oaths a lot of times are judicial oaths, where you stand in front of a judge and you make an oath. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her soul, her husband shall set for her, and her husband shall remove for her. But if in keeping silent he should remain silent at her day by day, then all her vows shall stand to her, and the sets of limits upon her shall stand to her, for he kept silent at her in the day in which he heard. But if removing, her husband should remove them after the day which he heard them, that is, later, she made a vow and the husband didn't say anything, but later it didn't work out, and he didn't want this vow to happen. She vowed something, it just didn't work out for the family, and then he shall take the sin unto himself. So yes, he can do that, but then he takes the sin. These are the ordinances, many as the Lord gave. Now, what the Lord does in that case, we don't know. It's just hopefully that if it was a righteous thing that he was doing, that the Lord would forgive him. These are the ordinances, as many as the Lord gave charge to Moses, between a husband and between his wife, and between a father and a daughter in her youth in the house of her father. So that is the chapter on vows, along with Leviticus 27. Next, chapter 31, we'll go back into the history and away from the law. Israel wars with Midian. I hope you'll join us in the next video seminar. Until then, again, God bless.